All right, strap yourselves in, because today we are diving headfirst into some pretty mind-bending stuff.
Oh, yeah?
We're cracking open Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near.
Okay.
And let me tell you, this book, it's a wild ride.
It is.
Even just glancing at the blurbs on the back, they're hinting at a future that's, well, almost unrecognizable
Right.
from the world we know today.
Yeah, it really throws you into the deep end with this idea of the singularity.
Okay, so,
And that's not some small concept.
So-
We're talking about a point in time when technology is progressing so fast, it basically reshapes human civilization.
whoa, okay.
Yeah.
So hold on, we're not just talking about, like, flying cars and robot butlers, right? This is,
Not exactly.
okay.
Kurzweil is basing all of this on something he calls the law of accelerating returns.
Okay.
And it's the idea that technological progress, especially in information technology, it's not linear, it's growing exponentially.
Okay, I am intrigued, I have to admit,
Right.
but also a little confused. Give me an example of what you mean by exponential growth in technology.
Okay, think about it this way. The 20th century, it saw a crazy amount of change, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we went from horse-drawn carriages to landing on the moon.
For sure.
But Kurzweil argues that the 21st century, it won't just be a continuation of that progress.
Okay.
You see, based on the rate of advancement we saw at the turn of the millennium,
Mm-hmm.
he's predicting that the 21st century will be like experiencing 200 centuries worth of progress,
Whoa.
packed into a single century.
200 centuries of progress in 100 years?
Yeah.
That's a rate of change that's like almost impossible to wrap your head around.
It really is.
So how does Kurzweil even begin to organize his thoughts on something that massive?
Well, he breaks it down by outlining 6 distinct epochs of evolution.
Okay.
Starts with the very basic building blocks of life, simple molecules,
Mm-hmm.
and it builds from there, showing how each epoch becomes more and more complex
Right.
and lays the groundwork for the next.
Okay, all right, so walk me through this a bit. How do we go from molecules to this singularity thing?
So the jump from those simple molecules to DNA, that blueprint of life, that took billions of years.
Yeah.
But then biological evolution, it kicks in,
Right.
eventually leads to brains.
Mm-hmm.
And with brains comes this ability to create tools
Mm-hmm.
to shape the world around us in a whole new way.
I see.
That's where technology as we know it begins to emerge.
So we're talking about the transition from purely biological evolution to something driven by our own inventions.
Exactly. That's where we are now in this epoch of technology,
Okay.
where we're creating machines that are capable of increasingly complex tasks.
Right.
And Kurzweil's argument is that this is all building towards Epoch 6, the singularity, where those machines become so intelligent that they can design and create technology beyond even our ability to grasp.
Okay, so the singularity is basically when our own creations become the drivers of change,
Yeah.
leaving us humans in the dust.
In a way, yes,
Okay.
but it's not necessarily about being left behind. Kurzweil actually believes that this will lead to a fusion of human and artificial intelligence,
Right.
transforming human civilization in ways we can barely even imagine.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Right.
How does he see that fusion happening?
Yeah.
What are the forces that are driving us toward this point?
So Kurzweil highlights 3 intertwined revolutions
Okay.
that he calls GNR, genetics, nanotechnology, and robotics.
ENR.
They're already in motion, working together to propel us toward the singularity.
Okay, break that down for me a little bit.
Sure.
What does each of these revolutions look like in action right now?
Okay, well, take genetics.
Okay.
Think about how fast we can sequence DNA now.
Right.
In 2003, sequencing the SARS virus, it took a mere 31 days.
Wow.
Compare that to the HIV virus back in the 1980s, it took over 15 years.
That is a pretty dramatic difference in speed.
It is, right.
Okay, what about nanotechnology? That one always sounds a little sci-fi to me.
It might sound futuristic,
Yeah.
but we're already building circuits out of nanotubes.
Okay.
These incredibly tiny cylinders of carbon atoms.
Mhm.
And get this, when they're fully developed, they could be 100 million times more powerful than the human brain.
Wow.
We're talking about computational power that's almost unfathomable,
Yeah.
packed into something incredibly small.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all connects.
Right.
So what about robotics? Are we talking about robot armies here?
Not quite armies, but we are already seeing robotics and artificial intelligence like kind of seeping into everyday life,
Right.
even in things like video games.
Mm-hmm.
Think back to The Sims, too.
Yeah.
Those characters were powered by AI, each with their own motivations,
Yeah.
making decisions that created unpredictable storylines.
Right.
It's a peek into how artificial intelligence can create complex,
Right.
even engaging
Yeah.
experiences.
All of this rapid advancement is fascinating, I have to admit.
Yeah.
But the thought of manipulating our biology and merging with machines, it is a little unsettling.
I understand. And Kurzweil acknowledges the potential downsides of this level of technology.
Okay.
He discusses the risk of bioengineered viruses
Right.
or nanobots being used for harmful purposes.
Yeah.
These are serious concerns that need to be addressed.
For sure. For sure.
Definitely.
But it seems like he focuses more on the potential benefits than on those scary what-ifs.
That's right, to really grasp how radical those potential benefits could be.
Okay.
We need to talk about Kurzweil's idea of merging with machines.
This is where we get into cyborg territory, right?
Yeah.
He even quotes a scientist in the book who actually implanted a chip in his arm saying, I want to be a cyborg.
It might sound like science fiction,
Yeah.
but it's closer than you think. For example, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA,
Right.
is investing heavily in brain-computer interface research.
Really?
And there are scientists developing visual prostheses
Wow.
that essentially give sight back to people who have lost it.
Wait, so you're saying that restoring sight with technology is essentially a form of merging with machines?
Think about it. A visual prosthesis is connecting the brain with an artificial device.
Yeah.
It's a stepping stone to what Kurzweil calls uploading consciousness,
Okay.
which is this idea of transferring the information and patterns in our brains to a more durable, potentially immortal medium.
Okay, this is officially blowing my mind.
Or
So
it's,
we could wake up one day and not be limited by our physical bodies anymore.
That's the idea.
Wow.
Kurzweil paints a picture of what that could look like through a story about a woman named Molly
Okay.
living in this post-singularity world.
So what's life like for Molly in this future? Is it all sunshine and roses?
It's definitely a radical departure from what we're used to.
Yeah.
He envisions a world where nanobots keep us perfectly healthy, potentially even reversing aging.
Right.
Imagine vast virtual realities that are indistinguishable from physical reality,
Wow.
where we can experience anything we can dream up.
It sounds both amazing and a little terrifying all at the same time.
It is, right.
It makes you wonder if there's even such a thing as human in that kind of world.
Exactly. What happens to our sense of identity,
Right.
our purpose?
Yeah.
These are some of the big philosophical questions that Kurzweil wants us to grapple with as we move towards this potential future.
And all of this is tied to the ultimate implication of the singularity, right? The emergence of superintelligence.
Yeah.
AI that surpasses human capabilities in every way.
Kurzweil cites Nick Bostrom,
Hmm.
a philosopher who argues that superintelligence could be the key to solving humanity's biggest problems.
Mm-hmm.
Disease, poverty, even environmental destruction.
It almost sounds too good to be true. Super AI swoops in and saves the day.
Right.
But I have to ask, is Kurzweil just a wide-eyed optimist? Or does he, back up these claims?
He definitely has a reputation for being optimistic about technology.
Yeah.
But he's not just pulling these ideas out of thin air. He supports his claims with a ton of data and meticulously researched trends.
Okay.
And we haven't even gotten to the part where he addresses the skeptics head on,
Ooh.
which we can dive into next time.
Okay, consider me officially hooked. Looking forward to unpacking all of that in part 2.
Sounds good. You know what I find really interesting is that a lot of the technologies that Kurzweil points to as being crucial for the singularity, they're already being developed.
Yeah, it's like we're laying the groundwork without even realizing it.
Exactly. Take molecular computing, for instance.
Okay.
Back in the 1970s, two scientists, Avi Aviram and Mark Ratner, they proposed this idea of building computers using individual molecules.
So instead of silicon chips and circuits, we'd be using molecules as the building blocks of computers.
Precisely. At the time, it was purely theoretical.
Right.
We didn't have the tools to manipulate matter on such a tiny scale.
Yeah.
But fast forward to 2002,
Okay.
scientists actually created something called an atomic memory drive.
Okay. What in the world is an atomic memory drive?
It's basically a device that uses individual atoms to store data.
Wow.
Imagine storing your entire music library on a single atom.
That's wild.
It's a glimpse into the incredible potential of manipulating matter at the atomic level.
So we went from theory to working prototype in just a few decades.
Yeah.
That's a pretty strong example of those accelerating returns Kurzweil's talking about.
It is. And the pace of innovation in nanotechnology, it's only picking up speed.
Yeah.
In 2004, researchers at UC Berkeley and Stanford, they built an integrated memory circuit using nanotubes.
You mean those tiny cylinders of carbon atoms we talked about before?
Uh-huh.
The ones that are like super strong and conductive?
That's right. And what's really exciting is that companies like Nantero, they're actually building nanotube circuits using existing lithography equipment,
Really?
the same kind used to manufacture silicon chips.
So we could see these incredibly powerful nanotube-based computers hitting the market sooner than we think.
It's definitely a possibility. And then there's the whole concept of self-replication, which Kurzweil argues is essential for nanotechnology to really take off.
Okay, so what is self-replication and why is it so important?
Imagine machines that can build copies of themselves.
Right.
That means production could become exponentially faster and more efficient.
Wow.
We wouldn't be limited by traditional manufacturing processes.
But wouldn't that be incredibly dangerous?
Yeah.
What's stopping those machines from replicating out of control and, consuming the world?
It's a valid concern, and it's not just a science fiction scenario either.
Right.
We're already seeing progress in this area.
Really?
Scientists have actually built self-replicating nanowires inspired by prions,
Okay.
those self-replicating proteins found in nature.
Prions, those are the things that cause mad cow disease, right?
Right. Well, some prions can cause diseases,
Yeah.
but others, they actually play a crucial role in things like human memory formation.
Interesting.
It's a fascinating example of how nature has already solved this problem of self-replication at the molecular level.
So we're learning from nature's blueprints, but with the goal of controlling the process, right?
Exactly, and that's a crucial point.
Yeah.
We need to be incredibly cautious
Right.
and design robust safety mechanisms into these systems from the very beginning.
Kurzweil does address the safety concerns in the book, doesn't he?
He does.
He talks about the need for multiple layers of security and control.
Yeah, and he also stresses the importance of ethical considerations throughout the development of these technologies.
Okay.
It's not enough to just focus on how to build them.
Right.
We need to think carefully about why we're building them and what the potential consequences might be.
So it's not just about technological progress for the sake of progress.
Right.
It's about being responsible with these powerful tools.
Exactly, and that brings us to another key element of the singularity that Kurzweil explores: the philosophical and even spiritual implications of transcending our biological limitations.
This is where things start to get really mind-bending. He's not just talking about faster computers and longer lifespans. He's suggesting that the singularity could change our understanding of what it means to be human.
Yeah, he argues that the singularity isn't just about technology, it's about the evolution of consciousness itself.
Okay.
He even uses the term spiritual machines to
Really?
describe these future AI entities that could be capable of experiencing emotions, having beliefs, potentially even developing their own sense of spirituality.
It's like we're talking about the creation of a whole new form of intelligent life.
And Kurzweil believes this evolution of consciousness is inherent in the fabric of the universe.
Okay.
He argues that the universe is naturally driven towards greater complexity and intelligence.
Wow, that's a bold claim.
It is, and he backs it up by drawing on ideas from physics, cosmology, even theology.
Wow.
He's weaving together a lot of different threads to try and understand this potential future.
So this isn't just narrow technological forecasting.
Right.
He's trying to grapple with some really big questions about reality and consciousness.
Exactly. To understand his perspective, we need to go back to the idea we discussed earlier, the law of accelerating returns.
Right. That's the idea that technological progress isn't linear, it's exponential.
Right. And he provides a lot of historical data to support this idea.
Okay.
He looks at things like computational power, data storage, communication speeds, and shows how they've consistently doubled in capacity and decreased in cost for decades.
Right.
He argues that this trend will not only continue, but accelerate
Wow.
as we get closer to the singularity.
So he believes that the transformations we'll see in the coming decades, they'll be far more radical than anything we've experienced in human history so far.
That's his argument, and it's why he believes we need to start preparing for these changes now.
Yeah.
We need to be thinking about the ethical implications, the economic disruptions, the societal shifts that could occur as we enter this uncharted territory.
So it's not about passively observing these trends.
Right.
It's about actively shaping the future we want to create.
You've hit the nail on the head. And that brings us to one of the most controversial and thought-provoking aspects of Kurzweil's vision, the idea that we could potentially overcome death itself.
Hold on a second. Are we talking about immortality?
Well, Kurzweil is careful to distinguish between radical life extension and indefinite life extension.
Okay.
Radical life extension would mean significantly slowing down or reversing the aging process, potentially allowing us to live for hundreds or even thousands of years.
Okay, that's already a pretty wild concept.
Yeah.
What about this indefinite life extension?
That's where things get really interesting. He's talking about the possibility of becoming essentially immortal.
I have to ask, how does he think that's even possible?
Well, he points to several potential pathways,
Okay.
including nanotechnology, biotechnology, and uploading our consciousness.
Right.
Imagine nanobots repairing cellular damage, gene editing to eliminate age-related diseases, or even transferring our consciousness to a digital realm.
So we're talking about merging with machines on a whole new level. But even if it's technologically possible, wouldn't that raise a ton of ethical and philosophical questions?
Absolutely. What would it mean for society if people could live for hundreds of years?
Right.
How would we handle population growth, resource allocation, even the meaning of life itself?
Yeah.
These are some heavy questions to ponder.
And Kurzweil doesn't shy away from those questions, does he?
Not at all. He dedicates whole chapters of the book to exploring these philosophical and spiritual dimensions of singularity.
So this book isn't just about predicting the future of technology.
Right.
It's about exploring what it means to be human in an age of unprecedented change.
That's right. And it's a conversation that's becoming increasingly relevant as these technologies continue to advance at such a rapid pace.
I think you've given me a lot to think about.
Good.
But before I spiral down the rabbit hole of potential futures, maybe we should address the elephant in the room. Not everyone buys into Kurzweil's optimistic vision, right?
Of course not. There are plenty of critics who have valid concerns and counter-arguments. And that's what we'll explore when we come back for part 3.
All right, so we've spent the last 2 episodes really diving deep into Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near, exploring this idea of the exponential growth of technology, the potential for merging with machines, even the possibility of radical life extension.
Heady stuff.
It is, but now it's time to face the music.
Okay.
Not everyone is on board with this super optimistic vision of the future, right?
That's true. There are a lot of critics who raise some really valid points about the potential downsides of the singularity.
Right.
In fact, Kurzweil dedicates a good chunk of his book to addressing those very concerns.
So what are some of the main arguments against his vision? What are the skeptics saying?
One of the biggest critiques is this idea that human progress is inherently limited by, well, our biology.
Okay.
We're just not wired to think exponentially.
So we're stuck in a linear mindset?
Right.
While technology is racing ahead at an exponential pace.
Exactly. And that can lead to a sense of pessimism, this feeling that we're just incapable of keeping up with these rapid advancements.
Right.
We tend to underestimate what's possible in the long term because we're anchored to our own limited experience.
But Kurzweil seems to believe that even our limited brains can grasp these concepts, can even shape these exponential trends.
He does. He argues that we've already created machines that can perform calculations far faster than any human computers that store vast amounts of information. Tools that augment our own abilities.
So we're using our ingenuity to overcome our biological limitations.
That's his point, and he believes this process will only accelerate as we move closer to the singularity.
Right.
He envisions a future where our intelligence is no longer limited by the physical constraints of our brain.
Because we'll be merging with machines, tapping into the power of AI.
Exactly.
But even with all the potential benefits that Kurzweil outlines, there's still this lingering fear. What if these super intelligent machines turn against us?
Yeah.
What if we lose control?
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
It's the classic science fiction trope, right? AI becoming so powerful that it sees humans as a threat.
Right.
And Kurzweil acknowledges this. He argues that we need to be incredibly careful about how we design these future AI systems.
Okay.
We need to build in safeguards, ensuring they align with human values and goals.
So it's not just about creating intelligence, it's about creating friendly intelligence.
Yeah.
But how do we guarantee that?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
Kurzweil points to existing examples of AI systems that are designed to work cooperatively with humans.
Okay.
Things like medical diagnosis systems, navigation apps. even voice assistants.
Those are tools that augment our abilities, not replace us.
That's right. And Kurzweil believes that as AI becomes more sophisticated,
Hmm.
we'll see even more of these beneficial collaborations between humans and machines.
But there's still that underlying worry that we might create something we don't fully understand, something that could get out of control.
And that's why Kurzweil stresses the importance of ongoing research and ethical debate.
Right?
We need to be constantly evaluating the risks and benefits, making adjustments as needed.
So it's not blind faith in technology. It's about having a thoughtful, informed discussion about the implications.
You got it. Kurzweil isn't claiming to have all the answers.
Right.
He's offering a framework for understanding the trends that are shaping our future
Yeah.
and tools for navigating those challenges and opportunities.
Okay. So after taking this deep dive into the singularity is near,
Hmm.
what's the takeaway for our listener? What should they be thinking about?
I think the key takeaway is that we're at a pretty pivotal point in human history.
Yeah.
Technology is advancing at an unprecedented rate, and the choices we make today,
Right.
they will have a huge impact on the future.
So we can't just sit back and watch it all unfold.
No.
We need to be actively involved in shaping that future.
Absolutely. We need to be informed, engaged, and proactive.
Right.
We have the opportunity to guide these powerful technologies towards a future that benefits all of humanity.
You know, Kurzweil ends the book with this thought-provoking quote from Isaac Newton,
Yeah.
comparing himself to a boy playing on the harpsichord.
I like that.
Finding a few pretty shells while the vast ocean of truth lies undiscovered before him.
Right.
It's a reminder that even in an age of accelerating change, there's still so much we don't know.
Yeah,
So much left to explore.
absolutely.
So if Kurzweil is right, and we are on the brink of a technological revolution that could fundamentally reshape our world, what are you going to do with that potential? What role will you play in shaping this future? That's something to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive into the singularity.